My sister and I are in the process of restoring my 1949 Studebaker 2R5 pickup truck. Today I just wanted to talk about floating anchor nuts that are found on the door hinges and a couple other places on the truck, and what I did to try to mitigate some that were broken and needed to replace instead of having to do a lot of welding. Now this is what a floating anchor nut looks like, and as you can see, it's mounted to the vehicle here and here with these tabs, and it's got these two tabs here that actually hold a square nut in place. I replaced the old nut and put a new square nut into this one, and then the door hinge mounting bolts are screwed into this right here. Unfortunately, for most of these tabs that hold the nut in there broke off in the process of disassembling the truck, and so I had to come up with a way to replace these anchor points for my door hinges. I decided to replace the floating anchor nuts with these offset welding nuts here that I found at McMaster Car. This is the package that they came in, the part number. It's also got the dimensions there on it. The offset weld nut looks just like this. On one end you got the nut, and this one is a 5/16 by 24, which matches the bolts for the door hinges. And then I've got enough space here on the end that I can drill out and tap a small mounting bolt hole to secure this to the actual vehicle itself. The bolts / screws I decided to use were a number 6 by 32 thread. I first started off with these pan head screws that I found at Lowe's. 1/2 inch long, number 6 by 32 thread, Phillips end, pretty small head, but I decided to go with a different one. But I decided to go with this socket cap screw that I found at a local hardware store here called Elliott's. It's number 6 by 32, it's about 1/2 inch long, uses an Allen wrench to tighten it down, and it had just a slightly smaller head on it, so that's kind of why I went with that one. What I did do was I set up my press here, and then I took a bolt with a 1-inch washer, mounted it to my offset weld nut, so I had a little space there at the end that would allow me to go ahead and drill out a hole so that I could tap it out and mount this to my vehicle. And to get consistency, I set the press up, and the only thing that changed was the offset weld nut. And by using this washer, I was able to line my drill bit up on the offset weld, go ahead and tighten her down, and then from there go ahead and drill out my hole. And that is kind of a small bit, so make sure you take your time. If you press too hard on it, it can bend on you. But once you get the hole drilled out, then I used this number 6 by 32 tap to tap out the hole, and that would allow me to use my socket cap screws to mount this to the pickup. So here is my floating anchor nut, and this one has the tabs already broken off and the square nut taken out. And so what I need to do is I need to go ahead and grind down these high points here and these high points there. And once I get that done, kind of get her flat across there, then I can put in my new anchoring nut. So for my upper door hinge on the driver's side, this is kind of typical of what happened with those floating anchor nuts. The floating anchor nut broke off on the back here, and in addition, it broke off so much that all that left was the tabs on the left and right that mounted that floating anchor nut behind here. And as a result, I needed to make a washer to go in here so that I could have a level surface all the way across there. And here in just a second, I'll show you what this backside looks like with the floating nut broken off, and what that plate is that actually broke off completely there. And then the second thing is, in order to figure out where to drill that hole out, I actually put together a offset welding plug template where there's that hole that's drilled out, but I did not tap it. I just left it in as a hole. And then I just take that and I kind of lay it over there, get it centered get the nut portion centered as best as I can in that mounting location. And then I'll take my drill and I'll drill through there, mark the body, pull that off, and go ahead and drill that on out. So this is a location for a floating anchor nut that had broken off. This plate was actually there, and this is where the high point was here and the high point there that I talked about earlier. So when I ground those off, the center part actually came loose. And I wanted to continue using that because it actually has an inset there that I hope you can see that allows me to keep this lined up with the hole. And by reusing that, I could then put my offset welding nut inside of there, and that would allow it to stay flat against the body. And that is why I had to put a washer on that upper door hinge that I just talked about earlier. Now this is the offset weld nut that I'm going to use. You can also see where I drilled out and tapped this hole for that number 6 screw. And that's what's going to secure this to the backside there. I went ahead and fabricated this washer to put on the offset welding nut. And so here's what it looks like before mounting it to the vehicle. And the hardest part of this whole thing is getting this hole to line up with that hole right there. So we'll go ahead and do that. And I'll finish tightening up with my Allen wrench. This mounting bolt that I put in there does hold this offset weld nut in place, but it also prevents this offset weld nut from spinning on the back side because there's no way you can get a wrench in there. I can leave it snug because when I do put the door hinge on, it's actually going to cover over this and it will not allow it to unscrew itself from the offset weld nut. And then lastly, this is the door hinge mounting bolt here. It goes inside, mounts right there with the door hinge. The reason I snug this bolt down is because I do need this to be able to move just a little bit so that when I do put the door hinge and door on, if I need to make any adjustments, I've got enough room in here to make adjustments to align the door and stuff. And that kind of serves the same purpose as the floating anchor nut, whereas the nut in the floating anchor nut has some movement to allow for adjustments. I wanted to give you an opportunity to see what it looked like with the offset welding nut mounted. So this is my lower door hinge point there. We looked at that just a little bit earlier. Here's the piece of the mount that came off, and I'm going to reuse it. I'm going to slide that into here. And then I'm just going to go ahead and rotate this up. And then we'll just go ahead and tighten down the bolts on that. And so that's what it looks like. And now the door hinge mounting bolt will go through here and they will hold it up against there. So it's important to have this flat surface for that offset welding nut to set on. There were a couple of tools that I used that really helped me to be able to do this. I did buy this right angle attachment here for my Dremel tool, and what that allowed me to do is I put this grinding wheel on there and I was able to slide that in, and I was able to grind down the backside of those floating anchor nuts that broke off so that I could have a level surface. This worked out quite very well because most of the grinding was just to the left and right of the access holes there, and so I was able to grind those down and to make them smooth for all the hinges on the door. And finally, I had this camera system here that I was able to use to look inside of these small compartments here to kind of get a feel for what work needed to be done. It has a small camera head that's on a flexible cord here, allows you to bend it many different ways, and then it's got the actual screen here itself. For this particular camera system, I could go in through the front here because of the flexibility of the cord, but this end was small enough that I could actually gain access through my mounting hole in the back there, and you can see the camera coming out right there. And I'm going to go ahead and back it up, and we're going to take a look at that mounting nut. There is your offset welding nut that we just mounted, And what the camera allowed me to do is to see that it is flat against the body, which is what I wanted. And then if I were to bend this down a little bit, you can see the floating anchor nut on that bottom mount. And what the camera allowed me to see was that it's still in pretty decent shape back there and it's still functional. It's a good system. It allowed me to see what work needed to be going on back here. It allowed me to confirm what grinding needed to occur and to make sure that when I got finished with the work that it was good to go. Hopefully this will help somebody else out there. Thank you very much, and bye.